trying to divide, while the rest of us do everything we can to stay alive. If you and me...
Would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic. Because I say check it at the door advisedly, because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception, while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. Alright, I'm doing a double-decker podcast tonight. I'm joined here with, got John Logan Parsons III, as well as Aaron Nordstrom. John is co-founder of the Templar Collegia and current deputy grandmaster of the Order of Temple of Secret Initiates, Knights Templar lineage. He's a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, Amwork Rosicrucian, OMOT Order Martiniste of the Temple, Circe's International alumni, Knights Templar, author, guitarist, a lead singer of the band A Mercer. And then we got Aaron Nordstrom, who is a musician, as well as a Kung Fu practitioner, philosopher, member of the Templar Collegia, and an initiate of the Western esoteric tradition. He's been immersed in Esoterica since his teens, and he plays multiple instruments, and he is the singer for the band Gemini Syndrome, as well as Wyote. So lots to talk about. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to speak with both of you.
Wyote.
Okay, Wyote. Thank you for correcting me on that.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here with you, Sky.
Absolutely. I just want to thank you both for doing this. It's awesome that you guys are both here. This is really cool to be able to speak with you guys both at the same time. And is there anything else that either one of you would like to add in addition to your background as far as what I've laid out so far?
No. I mean, for me, no, not really. It's enough as it is. So
you've got quite the list there, Mr. John.
Yeah.
So firstly, I must ask.
I graduated high school. That was pretty cool.
That is cool. Not all of us here did. I would be including myself in that.
Yeah.
Although I did get my JED.
I got an equivalency diploma when I was 21.
Hey, there you go.
I had to get a diploma to go to college. So. Mm-hmm.
So John, any relation to Jack Parsons, the rocket scientist, by any chance?
No.
Okay.
I get that quite often, though. I do get that quite often because of the the occult stuff and the name and everything. We do look alike a little bit, especially when I have my goatee going and everything like that. And there's some kind of weird synchronicities and stuff, but as far as I know, I'm not related. So, and yeah, I don't have any plans on blowing myself up either. So,
yeah, I figured I might ask. There definitely was a plausibility there. I know that he was a member of, I think the OTO, if I'm not mistaken. But so yeah, I wanted to definitely talk a little bit about the music with you both before we kind of touch on the more esoteric aspects. But one of the songs that caught my attention initially recently was actually a collaboration between the both of you called Self-Evident, and that kind of catalyzed this conversation. And I think it's definitely applicable and relevant to the times. It's lyrically so on point. It's like, I see the powers that be trying to divide. And, that line alone, I feel like it's been somewhat of like a dominant backdrop for the last however many thousands of years in terms of the whole like kind of divide and conquer stratagem. Maybe you guys can kind of give a little bit of insight on the compelling factors or notions that kind of gave rise to that song and its creation, and talk a little bit more about its message. I guess I'll open it up with that question, and I'll start with you first, John, and then you can follow it up, Aaron.
Okay. Well, let's see. Aaron and I are quite close friends, and we've been friends for a while now. And I've been wanting to collaborate with him for quite a while. A lot of the immerser stuff, I tend to do a lot of collaborations with different artists or bring in guest singers and things like that. And Aaron was always one that I just really, really wanted to work with. And just over the last, a little bit of time or whatever, it was, there was always something going on, or, it wasn't the right time or whatever, but it was always kind of in the back of my mind. And I think it was in the back of Aaron's mind. And, I was working on this new track, and I thought it was something musically that, could fit Aaron, but also different enough to kind of challenge him maybe a little bit, to approach it in a way he wouldn't normally, because it's a little bit different from the Gemini syndrome stuff. So I had this track, and I hit him up, and I was like, hey man, you want to do this? And he was totally into it, and we started working on it. And I pretty much, I didn't have a sort of set lyrical construct or anything like that. I kind of gave it to Aaron and said, hey Aaron, like, write whatever you want, whatever you feel, because then he's the one singing it, right? So I want him to feel passionate about what he's saying. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Aaron if he wants to kind of talk about maybe the lyrical process, or we can both talk about,
Definitely
what the song became, but I think Aaron, as the lyricist and vocalist in that track, it'd be good to have him answer that.
Tag me in, coach. I'm ready to play. So yeah, John and I we've been knowing each other we've been knowing each other for years now. And we'd always talked about doing some music together, but for years I was under contract with Gemini Syndrome, where I couldn't do anything outside of that project without label approval. And getting label approval, I discovered, was a real pain and not a fun process to go through, and super frustrating. So sometime last year, earlier this year, last like 2022, we got out of that deal. We got out of our record contract. And so we're free agents, and I have the freedom to do anything I want, which is awesome. So John and we got a green light, right, to be able to finally do something together. It was never an issue of wanting or having the inspiration. It was literally having a legal roadblock that said I couldn't do it at fear or risk of being like sued by the label, which I was not in the market of trying to get involved in any of that nonsense. So, but here we are. And now I think that there's going to be some more immerser Aaron Nordstrom collabs to come. As time allows. So as for this song, I mean, I love John, and I love what he does. He's a great musician. He's an amazing player. He's a great songwriter. And he's my brother, man. So I love working with him. And it's nice because, like he said, he was trying to give me something that's a little different than what people are used to maybe hearing me do. And that's kind of a goal I have with everything that I touch. If I'm doing Gemini Syndrome, it sounds the way that Gemini Syndrome sounds. We've developed a kind of unique little niche for ourselves. But my other band Wyote sounds, in my opinion, significantly different musically. It's just a different type of rock, right? It's still rock and roll in some capacity. But John and his thing is different as well, right? So it was nice to venture off and maybe sing a little differently, and express myself in kind of a new or untapped way. You know, we didn't do any screaming on this song, which was cool. A lot of really pretty vocals, which is awesome. I really enjoy pop and R&B and that kind of stuff. So as far as lyrical content, it was when I sat down at the computer here and I put the headphones on, and it was the middle of the night like it usually is, and I started just kind of humming through it, and I was trying to tap into some sort of, I wasn't trying to make it political, and I wasn't trying to make it, you know, patriotic necessarily. Like we have John made t-shirts. It's got, I mean, it's self-evident with an American flag, and it became that thing, right? It became kind of politically driven in a sense, centrist, if you will, but political nonetheless. And then trying to tap into some of those, you know, earlier, like what was this country founded on? I watch the news every day, right? And I flip through all the different news stations, and I watch the divide. And like you said earlier, it's the divide and conquer stratagem, if I remember the words you used, right? And it's an age-old way to do things, is make people believe that there's an enemy, make them believe that that enemy is somehow a threat to them, and then they'll destroy that enemy out of fear, when in reality these are your neighbors and your brothers and sisters and your parents, you know what I mean? And we're all part of, there's a song in Wyote called One Human Family. So I kind of have this apocalyptic come together people right now kind of mentality when it comes to writing lyrics, and it comes out in a lot of stuff. But I was also tapping into kind of like the founding of the country and the Freemasons, right? Like I'm not a Mason, but certainly I know a bunch of them, and I've read a bunch of the books that they have propagated, and you know, I was trying to pay homage, I guess, to that mentality of all men created equal, or all humans created equal, right? And everybody being part of this giant organism called Earth. So trying to tie in some spiritual stuff, some modern relevance, and then, you know, try to put a positive message in there, sort of.
Absolutely. And
to
it
remind people that you know, we're all in this thing together, man.
absolutely. And it's definitely so relevant. And it's funny because I recently started reading Morals and Dogma, and, you know, Albert Pike, Freemason. A lot of it kind of ties in so nicely, and it's so good. And a couple things he says true Masonry, unemasculated, bore the banners of freedom and equal rights, and was in rebellion against temporal and spiritual tyranny. And then he kind of goes into further stuff. He says, light is virtue, manliness, intelligence, and liberty. Tyranny over the soul or body is darkness. The freest people, like the freest man, is always in danger of relapsing into servitude. And then he talks about the two greeds that are like plagues of leprosy. The first being how the ledger becomes the Bible, and how the capitalist buys profit with the lives of the laborers, coining a nation's agonies into wealth and the enginery of money. This, as well as the greed of office, as being the two columns of the entrance to the temple of Moloch. And I read that and I was like, damn, he knew what was up, and it's just so relevant even to this day. And so yeah, I kind of wanted to throw that out there, but I found I was listening to those lyrics, and I was reading this book at the same time, and I was like, wow, this is so kind of like synchronistic, and it was so good.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I feel like you know, the song itself is about unifying people, right? It's unifying as opposed to dividing. And you know, the same thing can be said internally for an individual, right? Sometimes we're united within ourselves, or we're divided within ourselves, you know. And in order to grow, or be a leader, or whatever it is, you know, you need to unify within yourself, right? Philosophically speaking. And I also you touched on a cool point about Albert Pike, and it's no surprise to me, because the whole, you know, part of the you know, the whole idea of democracy comes from secret societies. You know, that's one of the things that the Masons and Rosicrucians and Templars and all kinds of other orders have perpetuated through the ages. You know, it's like Pharaoh Akhenaten was considered like the first sort of democrat, and these traditions have kind of carried that on, that human beings, we are all equal, that everybody has rights as an individual. But something I think that has been lost in our times, especially our current times, is the idea that freedom is a responsibility. It's not just a right, it's a responsibility. So you could say, oh, I'm free, I can do whatever I want, I should be able to do what I want, behave however I want, blah 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 blah. But at the end of the day, there's a responsibility with this freedom. It's not something to take lightly. When you have the freedom without the responsibility of it, or the understanding of what happens when you don't have law, when you don't have some sort of order, things become chaos. You know what I mean? So it's important, that's the other side of the story that gets overlooked. Everybody's freedom, but they forget about responsibility. So it's that's another thing that I think that these traditions have tried to perpetuate too, is it's good to have these high ideals and these reach for something higher, but it's always important to have one foot on the ground, right, at all times, because things can get crazy.
Absolutely.
I got to say something about music in response to that, right? You made me think about being a player, as a musical player, right? Let's say as a guitar player. And I've been playing guitar now for about 30 years. I've been playing for a long time, and I have this what I would consider an element of musical freedom when I play guitar. I have a command over the instrument because I've done it for so long, right? And that gives me this freedom, right, as to express, and this freedom to create. But that freedom required discipline, and that freedom required tenacity, and it required repetitiveness, and it required showing up over and over again to do the thing. And I feel like that's a parallel metaphor to what you're talking about with freedom, where it's like we want to be able to do whatever we want. We want to be sovereign, we want to be self-reliant, we want to be self-responsible, but that requires us to be those things, right? You have to take up the weight of that responsibility and carry it with it. Pick up your cross and follow me, if you will, right? Like, you got to do the work, right? It doesn't just why can't I just pick up the guitar and be awesome? Because you got to work at it,
And kind of, on that note, like, that's, freedom is, you earned it in that sense. Like, I think Jocko Willink says almost the same exact thing. He's talking about discipline equals freedom, and you earned that freedom by your discipline, and that freedom was exercised. And I think that's super important to emphasize, is that exercising of your freedom and kind of really dialing it in and attuning yourself to that. And yeah, I think that's such a good point. And kind of like similar on that note, John.
Can I touch a little more on that?
Please do. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh. Yeah, I was just thinking, like, a lot of us when we're younger, it's kind of a good example of, like, at least for myself, when I was a teenager or whatever, young guy, I was just doing all this crazy stuff, right? Self-destructive stuff. Thought I was, having all this freedom to do whatever I want and behave however I want and disrespect whatever I want. Yeah. And what happened is I eventually ended up in my own prison, right? You become like, if you don't have responsibility, you think you're free, but you're ending up, you're more of a prisoner than you would be. It's kind of a weird thing, but I think that's a part of life, right? Like, all of us kind of have to learn that. And as a culture and as a society too, I think we're such a young kind of country, so to speak. I mean, compared to other places like that, we're still children. We're still kind of figuring that out, what this is, and we forget too also that this is an experiment in the first place, right? So who knows, right? But it is self-evident, like what Aaron, Aaron's title for the song and stuff. And
yeah, definitely. I can totally agree to that whole self-destructive sort of phase 100%. Like, I definitely went through that whole period as well, and I think that there should be room for that, and a kind of an understanding for that circumstance to occur in society. And nowadays it seems like it's a little bit more complicated with, you know, the whole everybody's eyes are on you at all times, that it seems like almost every phase of your life is being monitored and then put out there. And it's like we need to have these understandings about these stages of development within our human nature and allow for them to occur and understand what that is in order to kind of allow that growth process to occur. So yeah, I just want to say I totally agree with that part, because I've definitely had that whole thing happen in terms of my own life personally, for sure. And then I wanted to kind
You
of
could say the same thing about, you could say the same about martial arts too. You could say the same about kung fu, right? Like if you train kung fu, when you translate those words into English, it means hard work over time to develop great skill. And what training in martial art or kung fu does for you is gives you a certain self-sovereignty in the physical three-dimensional world over, right, danger and threats. But again, that requires discipline. It requires showing up every day and doing the work. So it seems like you could kind of tie this metaphor into just about anything that we do as humans in this place, right?
Absolutely. And
Yes.
and John, one of the songs that you have, it's actually called Transmute, and this may be kind of related, but I'm aware that in terms of your early days, you know, growing up, some of your history to where you're at now, it definitely appears to be quite a transmutation. And you know, yourself as well as you, Aaron, I've listened to some of your past interviews, and I saw that John, you attribute a lot of that transmutation to the seeking out of knowledge and spirituality and religion and God, and that kind of led you to becoming involved in multiple esoteric traditions and so on. And I think that this point is so interesting because to the uninitiated out there, when they often hear of some kind of esoteric order or group or tradition, at first glance, it can kind of be just, you know, totally like off the radar, like completely such a foreign, mysterious concept in terms of the value within some of these organizations. And I can at least speak from my own perception in the past, you know, that kind of fear of the unknown. And I don't even know what like I had in my mind in terms of my perceptions exactly, but I recall phases of definitely uncertainty with things like Freemasonry or whatever. But the more I kind of begun to investigate into various orders, whether that be like the Golden Dawn or the Rosicrucians or Martinism, the more I've gotten to know about them and kind of discuss these things, I've found that, you know, like these are my kind of people, and it's the exact kind of things that I'm interested in, you know, such as like alchemical understandings or philosophical and spiritual matters, you know, development, self-realization, and the deeper exploration and understanding of quote unquote God. What is meant by that, you know, it's very particular to some, but regardless, I just find it really interesting. And I find that the individuals that I've talked to, at least personally, they're very flexible in their discussions, and they also have a very thoughtful like approach to how they live their lives. And so I just wanted to see if you could maybe speak a little bit about your experience or your journey from, you know, your early days of approaching esoteric traditions, and how any of your involvement, how would you describe what was the pull for you, and maybe your involvement in many of these esoteric schools, how it has shaped your life. And then I'll kind of get your perspective as well on that, Aaron, because I think there's crossover, obviously.
It's a lot, dude. Let's see. Yeah, so I mean, I had some issues when I was younger, some drug abuse and stuff like that. Had a pretty hard childhood and stuff. Lost my father when I was 4. Just a lot of stuff that you know, hurt me very deeply, and I never really processed it or learned how to deal with it, and just kind of took all that anger and frustration and turned it towards myself. And in a real self-destructive way. And you know, I always had this I guess anger towards God, or frustration towards whatever God was, because I kind of blamed God, right, for all of these things that had happened in my life and things like that. And you know, I went through a rehab program very young. I was in a live-in program, like a lockdown rehabilitation facility, for about 2 years, which is quite a while, quite a long time. But it took that amount of time for me to get healthy. And you know, and it helped me grow, and it put me on a path and gave me a lot of tools. But there was still something missing. I didn't have sort of a, you know, I've always been a spiritual person, I guess, and I've always kind of been a mystic, I guess, before I even understood what that was. But I didn't really have a solid connection to it, you know. And so I didn't, you know, I ended up screwing up again, and ended up homeless and all kinds of fun stuff. So we'll skip past some of that. But and in turn, I had this awakening, basically. I had a kind of an experience, and it sort of woke me up, you know. And it was really weird. It was almost like stepping into, it's almost as if something else stepped into me, you know. Like my thinking had changed, everything had changed, literally overnight. And you know, it's kind of a weird coincidence. I ended up I was homeless at the time, and I was living in my car, and I had a bunch of my belongings and stuff. And I had some family heirlooms that I've been holding on to, and you know, I didn't think too much about them. But you know, part of me getting myself together was organizing my things, my belongings and stuff. And you know, I was going through that stuff, and I found a, you know, a Masonic membership card, you know, a Freemason membership card, and it said John Logan Parsons on it. And I was like, I don't, you know, I've done drugs, I've been pretty screwed up, but I've never been so high that I joined the Masons and didn't remember. Right. But then I was like, oh, this must have been, because I saw the date, and it was like 1963 or something like that. So I was my grandfather, right? And he passed away, so I didn't really have a chance to ask him about it, but it sparked a curiosity for me. I'd never thought about Freemasonry, never knew what it was, had no idea. But that was the first step, was just this curiosity, you know, I had, what is this, you know. And I found out that it had such a huge, like, it's a huge tradition in my family, going back to like the 1700s on my father's side. And so I pursued that. And this kind of like what you said, I found people that that were like me, you know, compassionate people that were intelligent, people that were trying to better themselves, that were open to learning. And something just snapped in my brain, literally. Like I read, I think like a thousand books in 2 years.
Whoa.
Yeah. I just started absorbing all of this information. I would literally, like, every single day listen to like nothing but Manly Palmer Hall lectures, like in my car all day, every day. I think I listened to them all. It took me about a year of listening to nothing but Manly P. Hall lectures. And I just had this like thirst for knowledge, and I was just growing as a person. And I mean, I wasn't a Mason for very long, and I was already lecturing at my Masonic lodge, and I was teaching people that have been Masons for 50 years things that they didn't know. And through that process, I just kind of felt like I wasn't getting the whole picture. Like the people that were around me weren't providing enough. Not that they were not doing a good job, but I wanted more, you know what I mean? So then I started seeking other traditions, and got involved in, you know, the Rosicrucian order and all kinds of other stuff. And eventually came across Timothy Hogan, who's the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and he helps run the Templar Collegia. And you know, really hit it off with him, and he's been a very dear friend of mine, and also an amazing teacher for a lot of things. And So yeah, but yeah, totally. I could go on and on, dude. I don't, uh, but yeah, all of that stuff helped me. You know what I mean? Like it helped me be who I am. But I realize now that if I hadn't have made the mistakes I made in the past or done the things that I had done, I wouldn't be who I am today. You know what I mean? It's like
100%. Yeah.
those things they enable me to speak to people from the heart. You know what I mean? Because it's like I can understand where you're coming from, right? Like I'm gonna have more impact on somebody. Reading a book about something is one thing, but actually experiencing it is another, right? And you can tell when somebody's authentic or they're just full of shit.
100%. I love it. That's beautiful. And then I guess I would kind of ask you the same thing, Aaron. How did this kind of pull manifest for you? How has it kind of shaped you as a person as well in terms of your kind of pull towards like the esoteric realms and all of this?
So like John, there's some similar and there's some uniqueness, right? There's some parallels between our stories for sure. And then definitely at some point our paths cross and have remained kind of parallel at this point. So as a kid, I was very involved in the church. My mom and my family were very religious, very fundamentalist Christian. I was like avid Sunday school on Wednesday, you know what I mean? Church and morning at night on Sunday. We were into it. Sang in church all the time. That's where I started doing music. And I mean, I was wrapped up in that. I was like, I believed. I was a believer as a child, and I was fulfilled by it, right? And that planted some seeds in me. And then at some point in my teens, I experienced something similar to what John was talking about. There were the people that were around me didn't have answers to my questions, and that frustrated me as a kid, as a child. Because I didn't take anybody's just word for anything. I wanted explanations. I wanted to understand the things that I was learning about. And if you couldn't answer the question and you just gave me an answer, it was like, oh, it's just the way it is. It was like my biggest pet peeve, right? So I had to go seek out answers. And becoming a teenager, I was teased a lot for being different. I have albinism, clearly. I was put through the ringer as a kid for that. And at some point, like, that becomes anger and that becomes self-abuse and hatred. And that turned into me also in this like anger at God for like the disparities of the world. You know what I mean? God's supposed to have us all in his hands. He's got the whole world. Well, what's he doing with it? And I was upset, you know what I mean? So shortly, that was in my early teens. And then shortly after that, I was going to school, and I was going to school for psychology and philosophy and music. And in that realm, I started studying world religion. And that had always fascinated me because Christianity always did. So I branched out and started researching all of the different faiths of the world. And in that process, I came across the Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all of that stuff. And I started reading about the Gnostic end of things, and it turned me on to a whole world that I didn't know existed. And that turned me on to like the Kabbalion was probably my first introduction into Hermetic philosophy. And around that time I started reading Robert Anton Wilson and the Illuminatus trilogy and all of those conspiracy theory kind of ended books. And all of that culminates eventually in kind of the same place, right? When you're dealing with secret societies, religion, psychonauts, mysticism, conspiracies, aliens, and God. If you research all of those things, they kind of lead to the same place, it seems. So I started looking into it. I actually had this memory come back to me. I would hang out with my friends a couple of my friends were homeless as kids, right? And I'd go live with them for days at a time. And one of the places we hung out at was the park in front of the Theosophical Society. And at 18, I was sitting out at the front of the Theosophical Society reading the Kabbalion and the Illuminatus and having no idea what theosophy was. It just seems so ironic to me, like 23, 24 years later, here I am like, I have Isis Unveiled on the bookshelf, and I was hanging out in those places, like probably by serendipity or whatever. I don't know. Synchronicity, call it what you will. But I had approached Freemasonry a couple times in my 20s. And didn't, For some of it was circumstance, and some of it was, you know, out of my control, and some of it was within my control, but it didn't seem to have exactly what I was looking for. But I'd always managed to come across sort of these people on the end of the spiritual path or the mystic path in whatever context they were in, right? And eventually we started Gemini syndrome, and shortly thereafter my drummer became a Freemason, and he was super into this esoteric stuff, and he was just kind of beginning his journey, and he had introduced me to Tim Hogan. And this is where John's and my story becomes really, really similar. And I went to a lecture at a Masonic hall in Pasadena, and he gave a lecture on Hermeticism as it relates to the craft. And not being a Mason, that was the most fascinating lecture I'd seen in probably 20 years since I was in school. And I was fascinated, and I felt like he was talking to me, and I met him that night. We became friends. We became good friends, and then he invited us to come out to Denver to experience the Templar Collegiate stuff and what they were doing there. And at that point, I had found a home for this type of study with people who had the same questions that I had, and actually had some answers, or at least could point me in a direction where I might find my own answers, as opposed to saying that it's just the way that it is and you shouldn't question anymore. And in fact, I'm encouraged to question, like everything, you know, and learn as much as I can. One other note I'd like to make on that is that in my journey too, I've definitely had some substance abuse issues, and I was definitely in rehab at one point for drinking. Being on tour all the time, it was super easy to become an active and functioning alcoholic. And John makes a really good point. I'm grateful for those experiences and those moments, because it gives me a Gnostic knowledge of what the hardships of life can be like, right? And again, you said it really well, John. Like, you can tell somebody who's been there and somebody who's just read the pamphlet or read the book, you know. And I feel like at this point I haven't had an easy life. I've had a lot of trials and a lot of challenges, but I've lived such an amazing experience here to be coupled with all of those trying times that, like, man, it's worth the ride, right? Just because I was able to go and know those things and traverse them and come out the other side better for it.
Yeah, and that's so amazing. And
Okay, I'm done.
I could definitely relate so much in terms of at least kind of your seeking and searching of answers. And, you know, at one point I had a brother-in-law who I just was really fond of, and I asked him about like whatever books that he would recommend and the authors, and he had recommended to me Carl Jung. And so I was like, all right, I went to the library. I think one of the books I got was Man and His Symbols. And then kind of eventually stumbled upon the Kybalion, similar to yourself. And then a book in the same section on Theosophy, and then Karma, which it was actually called The Law of Karman, like Karman. So I got those 3 books all together, and it kind of just opened my eyes to a lot of different philosophical notions and such. And then kind of learning about, I had an ex-girlfriend that would drop she would just drop these little tidbits on the Anunnaki and these ancient cultures and whatnot. And I was like, what are you talking about? So it kind of got me into looking into different like Sumerian tablets and all of these kind of things. But you know, the whole symbolism aspect was definitely a huge one for me. And you know, it's funny because like in terms of associated like symbols and symbolism, I'm a designer myself, and as a designer I love symbolism so much, and I love learning about like their origins and the meanings behind different symbols. And I can easily see people looking at something like, you know, the pentagram and making all kind of judgments and preconceived notions about what they think comes along with that symbol because of the, you know, like modern day programming that's kind of put out there and whatnot. But you know, John, you actually recently released I think it was Nancy Downs, and that kind of artwork, it features that woman drawing that pentagram. So I wanted to kind of get your input on that and that symbolism, and I wanted to ask you after that about your immerser symbol and kind of what that represents. Anything you can kind of lend to that about.
Okay. Well, the new single Nancy Downs is obviously dedicated to um Nancy Downs from the original Craft movie from the 90s. And I always thought she had like the really witchy eyes. The actress, her name's Firuza Balk. Totally cool. She's also a a mystic, and she's pretty cool. I actually have see if I can pull this off all here. Yeah. Cool.
And out of the darkness, he brings there
For
it is.
John,
Nice.
much love for
For John. Nice, dude.
Yeah. So she's kind of the main, sort of metaphorical character for that, but so it's kind of a witchy track, right? It's kind of geared towards witchcraft. And as far as the cover art, it's just somebody, a woman drawing a pentagram or a circle or whatever ritual she's about to do or finishing up. I think we're all pretty familiar with what the pentagram, so we don't really need to go into that. But I feel like you're right. I feel like people, it's weird. Like if I put that image, right, so many people can see that in so many different ways, right? Like, but I think people, because the last couple hundred, maybe even 150 years or something, it's been painted as this symbol that's associated with like the devil or evil or bad things, that people just, they see it and they associate with that. Like, who knows, maybe that picture is of a girl who's doing something really positive, like, we don't know, right? But we always project our own sort of thing onto symbols. And I think symbols are a mirror, right? And you were talking about Albert Pike earlier, and he said that symbols are like a mirror because they force you to confront yourself. Because if you don't, if you're presented with a symbol that you never seen before, you don't understand, there's nobody there to tell you what it means, and there's no books around, all you have is yourself to crack that symbol, right? So it really is a very humbling experience, symbols. And the pentagram is super old. It's way older than Christianity. And it's I think it was only more recently used in horror movies to depict like evil or scary things or the devil. That's more of a recent thing. So, and a lot of symbols, it's really about trying to get back to the source, right? Like, kind of peeling the layer, like it's like peeling the layers of an onion, right? There's going to be tears, man.
Absolutely.
So you're peeling the layers of an onion, sort of. And with the symbol, it's the same thing. There's so many different meanings throughout time, and you just kind of try to follow it as far back as you possibly can. And usually the closer you are to the source, the more pure the meaning is for that particular symbol, right? So yeah, a lot of I try to kind of put visuals in a lot of my stuff, lyrics, certain things. There's codes and stuff like that are fun for me, and maybe other people that are into that kind of stuff might have fun trying to find out what I'm trying to talk about. But yeah, that's kind of like sums that up. And this is where I can't, it's kind of weird doing this backwards because I'm seeing myself, but so this symbol right here is a symbol for it's an alchemical symbol, and it can mean mirror or glass, and so for me, that was very powerful because it's a reflective tool, right? It's and the whole idea of immerser is you're immersing yourself in something. You're immersing yourself within yourself. It's a reflective process, and I feel like the idea of reflection or a mirror is very prevalent in a lot of esoteric traditions. So it kind of was a good catalyst for that, and pretty cool. And Aaron has it on his Alchemical poster chart on his wall somewhere. I don't know if he still has that or not, but
Not in this room, but I do still have that poster.
yeah, so it's on there.
Yeah, well, I was looking at it as the alchemical table of symbols, and
Yeah.
and I was like, hey, that's your band logo. And
There it
that was
is.
according to that, it means glass.
That's awesome.
But
I'm gonna quick pause this real quick. I'm gonna take a quick bathroom break. I really gotta pee, and then we'll be right back. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause this real quick.
Secrets of the Universe and shit.
All right, so we're just kind of going over different symbolism, and another one that I find just super interesting. One of it's Eliphas Levi's famous Baphomet imagery, and it used to be kind of a scary symbol for me personally until I read Levi's book. I think it was The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic.
Ritual.
Which Levy, by the way, is probably one of my favorite writers. I think the first book I read by him is something like the Paradox of Science or something. It was just amazing. But yeah, I don't even exactly remember the details of how he laid it out at the top of my head in regards to the Baphomet symbology. But there's another symbol that I think springs from Levy, and that was the great symbol of Solomon, which I think it's called. I think that's what it's called. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Aaron, don't you have that tattooed on you or something along those lines? Is that correct?
I mean, I have that guy,
Yeah.
which is like some sacred geometry. I got a bunch of eyes and pyramids on me.
Might have-
I have this one. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep, that is the one I'm talking about. Okay, I was wondering if you could lend
one of
any.
my more recent ones.
I was wondering if you could lend any insight into that symbol and kind of like what is going on there, what it's kind of depicting and all of that.
So I guess we'll go from the outside in. On the exterior, there's an Ouroboros, the snake eating itself, right, as the outline. Inside, you've got two interlaced triangles, signifying as above, so below, with the kind of, I don't know, John, would you call that the magician? Would you call that would you call that deity in the middle? Would you call that the self?
Sure. Yeah, all of that.
All of that. And then
Yeah.
you got a nice Templar cross in the middle. So you've almost got kind of a Martinus Pantacle going on too in this symbol without being overtly that. And then there's some other little letters and stuff in here that I can't tell you what they mean because I don't know, which I hope doesn't make me a poser.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that symbol is also, if you know the symbols for the elements,
Mm-hmm.
if you take all of the symbols for the elements and you put them together, it creates.
You get that. Yeah, totally.
It's also, if you look at, wrong arm. If you look at like the square and compass, it's the same thing, right? It's just it's just broken. You see?
Sure. Well, like, interesting enough, so your glass symbol is kind of a partial of this cross of Lorraine in a sense too, right? Like, and then if you look at the papal cross, I was looking up the cross of Lorraine the other night when my hoodie showed up in the mail. And I was doing some research on it, and it's like, so the papal cross is the 3 tiers, and if you look at that, that's almost like an outline of the tree of life in Kabbalah, right?
Yeah.
So you have all of these symbols hidden in each other, which is fascinating to me.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think that, like, I mean, symbols are to me, in my opinion, symbols are the way that Creator speaks to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through symbol. It's like, when you're dreaming, all that is just symbol.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this. So I've seen some stuff on different like UFO abduction or like close encounters kind of stuff, and there's people who have talked about it, like, interacting with aliens or whatever, and that when they communicate, it's not in a language form. It's in David Bowie pictures like that. So I don't know. I just wonder if maybe there's something to be said. And like, I was also reading something that Tim wrote last night about if you look at the old languages, if you look at Egyptian, they come from pictures, right? And like there's got to be something to that about being able to express a larger or more complex idea with a simpler image than using the written word to do it in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Like a symbol is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it
open to interpretation, right? Like,
yeah, it like we were talking about earlier. It's like a mirror. You know, you're putting into that symbol what you right.
Totally.
Yeah, it's like it's a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? It's, you know, I mean, you could read, you know, you could obviously, you know, poetry and things like that and beautiful writings are amazing, but you know, when you look at a painting of something that really resonates with you, it can be life altering.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
What's interesting too, don't we say that when people are eloquent with words, they paint pictures with words, right? It's like because of the good use of words, we get an image in our mind. That's crazy, man. I never thought about it like that. Thanks for that, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think symbols are the oldest way of communicating. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like our ancestors, they'd try to communicate with each other and they'd probably just take a stick and draw a little thing in the sand, right?
Right.
It's the most basic communication tool, and it's something that can cross any, it's like music, you know, it doesn't matter who you are, what language you speak, what your life experience is. A beautiful song is a beautiful song. So it's like it's same thing with the symbol. It's like if you have a symbol of the sun, you know, I mean, everybody's gonna understand. You wouldn't have to explain it. You know, it's just an easier way to kind of get a message across. And I think that, you know, something as simple as the square and compass or the Templar cross or whatever, or Aaron's tattoo, it's a way to sort of encode truths and pass them down in a way, right?
Definitely.
Because like you said, a symbol can mean so many things, you know what I mean, for, you know, so many people, but there's ultimately a key to all these symbols too, right? There's usually, just like there's a key to many esoteric books and stuff, and there's usually 7 meanings to every symbol that are super foundational. But yeah, man, totally.
Definitely. And kind of like,
awesome.
You know, sort of related, because like Aaron with yours, like it's related to Solomon, and I love Solomon in particular because he's such like a universal figure, and both like magical and even you know magical and esoteric, as well as like Christianity. And so he's like one of those rare sort of figures that kind of bridges that gap. So I love any, you know, kind of symbolic representation that has to do with Solomon or just Solomon as a figure in general, because he's such a gap bridger, I would say. Actually, I named my son's middle name Solomon. But I just thought that was interesting for sure.
Yeah, even of Western culture at large, right? With the 3 major Abrahamic religions all share him as a character, right? At its beginning. So, you know, he seems. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I want to hear what you were going to have to say. It's going to be more interesting, I'm sure.
Dude, it won't be.
I was just going to say that it's crazy to think that there's this archetype, this person, who is central to so much of what we experience today, right? On a fundamental, like almost subconscious level, and most people probably don't know anything about it. You know, I just find that crazy. Something that can be almost virtually unknown by the masses, maybe, but everybody knows Temple Mount in Jerusalem, right? Everybody knows that place.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, if you also, if you just look at his name, Saul, and On those are 3 different names for the sun. So it's kind of a, you know, that character is a symbol, right? There's no evidence that this person Solomon ever existed, just like there's no evidence that Jesus ever existed. It's all symbol. So, you know, that's something to think about too.
Definitely. You think of like
well, my little guys are gonna freak out here for a minute because my roommate is home. I'll just mute my end until I got
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the Saul aspect to Saul, obviously meaning son, and then Amen. Um, John, so you authored a few books, A Visitant of the Heart, Per Divinum Oculis Mais. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then Saint John.
Yeah, good job. Yeah.
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 Talk to me a little bit about Saint John. Your name's John, Saint John. Talk to me a little bit about Saint John and his significance as a figure, and kind of like what he represents. I'm not like super, familiar, but yeah, I'm just really curious because you wrote a whole book about it. So I want to know like what kind of really strikes you in terms of Saint John.
Okay. Well, the book that I put together is, so I through my journey through all of these esoteric traditions, I kept coming across Saint John the Baptist all the time. And it seemed to be something very important, yet nothing ever explained it. So it was like this character who is super important to all of these traditions, especially the Knights Templar, but nobody ever explained it. Right? It's really weird. And that just kept coming up, and I felt the need to kind of figure this out. And I realized that, if you think about it, like, so Saint John would be probably the most important Christian martyr, right? Because he's the first one he gets his head cut off. But you rarely hear about him. He's also, like, if you go to like a Catholic bookstore or like any kind of religious supply place, they'll have every saint you could possibly think of. They'll have like medallions and candles and onesies or whatever. But you're hard pressed to find a lot of Saint John stuff. And it was like one of those things where you like, once it becomes a part of your consciousness, you're like, you see it everywhere. You're like, what's going on here? So, and I also noticed that there's very little of writings attributed to him or gospels or things like that. And the ones that were out there seemed very difficult to locate, which was also very weird, right? So here's this character that's super duper important to all of these esoteric traditions that are keeping secrets that they're willing to die for. And they're venerating this Saint John, but they never explain why. And so it just started kind of making me pretty curious. And so what I did is, because, in order to have any of that Saint John, those writings or writings attributed to him or about him or associated with him, you'd have to have this library, because there's nothing in one volume. So what I did is I looked for every single book I could find or writing I could find associated with St. John the Baptist and the evangelists as well, but mostly St. John the Baptist, and I compiled them into one book. And I was astounded that nobody has ever done that.
Wow.
Like, think about that for a second. Like, it's never been done.
Wow.
Why do you think that? Like, things like that. I'm like, what's going on here, man? Like, and then you have cats like Da Vinci, who are like the freaking, Leonardo da Vinci is like the greatest genius ever, who's obsessed with John the Baptist. Mm-hmm. Now, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why? And and then you have like these they're called the Mandaeans, and they're the oldest not surviving Gnostic religious sect. They go all the way back to the time of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And they venerate John, which is weird. You'd figure, well, they'd be into Jesus, right? But they actually despise Jesus. They call him the usurper.
Oh, wow. And
kind of weird, man. And then you start coming across information and things that are alluding to possibly books in the New Testament were actually attributed to John, and they just kind of changed the name to Jesus. You also have. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, I have a comment, but I'll wait for you to finish.
Okay. You also have like ancient Gnostic texts where it is John, right? And we're all familiar with the story where John baptizes Jesus, and then Jesus becomes like this miracle worker and goes and does his thing, right? Well, an even older story in a Gnostic text talks about John, and that Gnosis, or divine intervention, or whatever it is, consciousness, that greater consciousness, comes to John in the form of a child or a dove.
Mm.
And John is baptized with the Holy Spirit and becomes the Christ. So the dangerous thing is that you have a story about a man born of a woman, not superhero, doesn't walk on water, just a dude who worked really hard and became Christ-like, right? So if you remove the Jesus narrative and you realize that it's actually a story of one person, it's pretty interesting. It becomes a different book altogether. And then, throughout time, like there's all of these edits and things that have happened in Council of Nicaea and all that stuff. But ultimately, it is my belief. And there's also historical evidence that John existed. There's actually an ancient historian who mentions John. He says there's this spiritual teacher, John the Baptist, who has this gigantic following, but he doesn't mention anything about Jesus. And it's the same time.
Yeah,
there's a lot there, man. So to me, yeah, if the Templars, one of the secrets that the Templars were guarding, it would be that.
Wow.
For sure. And that's why all of these traditions have venerated John, because he represents Gnosticism, that you don't need a mediator, that a single person can become Christ-like through their own efforts. It gives the power back to the people. You as an individual can grow. You don't need a mediator. It's not outside of you. The character Jesus is like sort of outside of you. It's like this unattainable thing, right? Whereas if you realize it's actually a story of one person, it becomes something that anybody can grasp, anybody can do.
And it's freedom and sovereignty tied with responsibility, right?
Right.
How awesome is that full circle?
That's pretty awesome.
Sorry,
yeah.
I didn't mean to like ramble on.
No. I welcome it. I love it. And I have a few thoughts that come to mind when that, because, I think of just kind of recently going over that, I think that Eliphas Levi book that I was listening to. I remember him saying something along the lines of the book of Revelations as the book of Gnosis, or the secret doctrine of the first Christians. And I think he was saying something along the lines of what he said, the key indicated by secret Kabbalistic verse or something, which the Vulgate doesn't translate, and that the tradition of Saint John, the priests, only the priests were allowed to pronounce this particular verse within the book of Revelations, or something along those lines. But then I think he said something about it being contained within the Gospel of Matthew as well. I wasn't sure. But is there anything along those lines that ring a bell for you, or kind of make any sense in regards to what I just said?
Yeah. The book of Revelation is probably the oldest book. Even though it's maybe not seen that way in popular opinion, it's probably the oldest, and it's definitely the most esoteric and occult, and it deals with a lot of numerology, gematria, astrological, astrology, things like that. And I think that Jesus sort of represents And this is just my opinion. Okay. I'm not saying this is fact.
I love your disclaimers.
Well, dude,
You got to do it
No,
though.
you do it great, dude. I get it.
Jesus to me represents sort of the exoteric, right?
Mhm.
It's like the outer mysteries, right? Where John kind of represents the inner mysteries. So you can read that document and get something from it on a surface level. But if you study, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, alchemy, things like that, you're going to get a whole different set of keys to understand that document. So I feel like that's kind of the deal is Eliphas Levi. Maybe he's alluding to that there's a deeper meaning to these things. And John being kind of a sort of alluding to that to those that have the ears to hear, right? It's like it's kind of a wink wink, like that's what he's alluding to. The tradition of John, right? And I know that Timothy Hogan, he's talked a lot about how the name John has been a title. It's almost like a title for leaders of esoteric traditions throughout the ages too, which is kind of interesting. Why wouldn't they name them Jesus?
Good point. Yeah.
Just food for thought, just something to think about. It's like
at the very least, it points to the idea or the possibility that there is something going on there that's not being explained on the surface level, right? Definitely. At the very least, it's saying that there's some sort of significance to that character, and maybe you should go dig a little deeper. I gotta also say too, it's that line, "Let he who has ears to hear." Right? I remember coming across that and in the Gospel of Thomas when I was probably 16, 17 when I started reading that stuff. And that was one of those moments where I was like, I know there's something more to all this, right? There's more than what I'm being sold on the street or on the corner. You know what I mean? And that was a huge turning point for me. So I just thought I'd interject that.
Yeah. Hey, there's so much. I mean, there's so much there, man. Like, it's incredible. It's incredible. Like, what is the sign that Jesus makes most often with his fingers? Anybody? Yeah. Right. And what is the sign that John most often makes?
For the ones listening,
one,
maybe you could
two.
Describe.
It's like to me, it's like alluding to something. I know there's all kinds of meanings and all kinds of stuff, but to me, it's alluding to something there. Like number one.
Right. For the people listening, it's the symbol that the Pope makes all the time too, right? It's like or it's the sword finger in Tai Chi, oddly enough.
Yeah. So there's like number one, and then there's number two. But it's also, I mean, in what you're talking about, popes, Aaron, and stuff, like they wear hats that look like fish heads. Which comes from Ioannis, which John Iowan. It's all
wearing the fish skins and
they don't even understand that. So they're actually like wearing something that represents John the Baptist. Why?
Wow. Yeah.
Why?
Eyes to see and ears to hear, for sure. I definitely resonate with that, and even on that note, like I think that it was Tim Hogan that I had listened to something of his where he was describing that actually at one point Eliphas Levi did have access to the Vatican archives at one point, so he was able to reference a lot of these texts, and that was something that I had no idea about. So when him and Napoleon took the whole archive to Paris. Wow. That's fascinating, because that kind of lends so much credence to his whole kind of knowledge base and his whole esoteric view and his the way that he conveys all of his information. Because I mean, when you listen to his writings, and I've only listened to the translated versions, I think it was the John Michael Greer, is that correct? The Greer translation of the doctrine of high magic or whatnot. But man, it's just wow, like this guy, his whole intellect was so in depth and so far reaching that he obviously had access to a wide far extending knowledge base of information. Like it wasn't coming from any place of naivety, that's for sure.
For sure, I couldn't agree more. Right, it gives some validation, because considering that he's talking about things that he had access to, probably the most coveted library of secrets on the planet. Right,
Definitely.
I have that same translation. I'm looking up that name.
Yeah,
It's interesting too that, you know, so like Morals and Dogma, the book you're reading, is literally plagiarized from Elvis Levi.
yes, and I had just
Like
recently
word for
learned
word.
that as well. Which is so fascinating, which makes
So
total
like
sense.
you know when there's right, but then there's there's Freemasons that are like, oh, like Freemasonry isn't esoteric, there's no secrets in Freemasonry, the only secret is there is no secrets. Like what are you talking about, man? Like you're more, the most important book to like the Scottish Rite is Morals and Dogma, which was essentially written by Albert Pike, who took it from Elvis Levi, who's talking about Templars, alchemy, Gnosticism, St. John the Baptist, like all of this stuff. So, I don't know, man.
And my
people got to do their homework.
100% people got to do their homework, and my hunch is that most people listen to people talking about it, but they don't actually go and listen to it for themselves, or they don't read it for themselves. But I just highly encourage people to go do that, because it's invaluable, like what you can glean from it, and it's just such another level of communication, in my humble opinion. I would say. And
Morals and Dogma is incredible, man. It's an incredible book. Like, it's a very difficult book to read. It takes a lot of patience. Like, but it's meant to be that way. It's not meant to be like go dog go, like go. It's something you want to digest over time. And there's so much. It's like it's like Manly Palmer Hall, like Secret Teachings of All Ages. It's such a huge book, but it's like if you just take a page a day, it'll have profound effects on you, man. And like, totally, Morals and Dogma is an amazing text. Super
Absolutely.
important.
Yeah. And then, so something you mentioned earlier, the Holy Spirit, and this is just one of those terms I want so much to ask you. How do you conceive of the Holy Spirit, or how would you kind of like convey that notion and what that means kind of in your mind? How would you convey that for people listening, like what that means to you? Because people throw around that term a lot, and yeah, I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Okay, so for me personally, it's a symbol of Gnosis, like that experience you have. It's not something you can define, really, right? It's like it's an aspect of God, right? You can't define it. To me, that's what it represents, is that moment of consciousness shifting, or that beautiful awakening. But I think it's different to different people, and I think that we get so wrapped up in different religions, and how you're supposed to believe, and what you're supposed to believe, and what God is or what God isn't, or how you're praying wrong or praying right, or blah 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 blah. People are missing the whole point. And I think that's a part of it, is like, the Holy Spirit to me is whatever it is to me, and it helps me become closer to God. Just like, it might mean something different for you or Aaron or whoever else. And instead of being like, you're doing that wrong, you should encourage people. And you know what, actually ask them like what it means to them, and why does it mean that to them, and maybe you can learn something that'll help you. Yeah. And for example, when I'm talking about John the Baptist, I'm not I'm not trying to belittle Jesus or anything like that. I think it's a wonderful symbol and it's helped millions of people. Great, but I'm just saying for me, like John is it's a symbol that works for me, right? It's like, you might like something that I don't like, whatever. It doesn't matter as long as people are growing and trying to understand themselves and God. So I don't really have an answer for you, man. I don't think there is a definite answer. I think somebody could come up with one or reference a book or say, well, this means that and blah, 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 blah. But honestly, like when it comes to religion and spirituality, it is an individual experience, right? Because you know what I mean? Like we're all experiencing this in our own way. But I don't know, man. I don't think there is a way to totally grasp it. Like if you kind of realize that, like if God is everything, if there's nothing outside of God, right? God's infinite, then that means there's nothing outside of God. that we're all God
in it.
Right now,
we're all in it.
Yeah.
100%.
We're just yeah. Right. So does it really matter anyway? You already figured it out. You just have to close your eyes and think. Just relax.
Yeah.
Like spirituality shouldn't be difficult. I think people that make it difficult, they're hiding, they're trying to make it difficult, or because they don't understand. It's the simplest thing ever. It's the most basic human thing ever is God. Like understanding that. You already understand it. You don't need to read a billion books,
Absolutely.
It's already there. You just gotta hear it, man. It's like there's that I don't know who said it or whatever, but it impacted me greatly. Somebody said like throughout your life, God is constantly asking you, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? And we all spend most of the time saying, no, not yet. No. It's just, are you ready? Are you ready? No, I'm not. Like, and then eventually you're like, yeah, I'm ready.
It's waking life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, it is? Okay. Great.
Yeah, that's the closing scene from Waking Life, dude. That's like that's the gnosis that he has, and that's the line that he uses. That's my favorite movie ever.
I love that movie.
Yeah. So that.
Absolutely. And I think that
I've had like this a lot of coffee.
Oh man, drink it up. Yeah, no, I think it's funny because a friend of mine, is Ike Baker. He kind of posed this question recently where he's saying like, is it worth asking a question that's unanswerable? And maybe that is one of those kind of unanswerable questions, but like I think it's definitely worth posing those kind of questions, because even the little that you can lend to it and you can attempt to describe it, it can give some insight, and it can give some kind of like notion into something that can give you a little hint of what it is that is being communicated, as subtle as that may be. So I do really just appreciate like any response at all, and I don't think that it's something that is it's not worth asking, because I definitely appreciate your response. Is there anything that you yourself, Aaron, would like to add to that, or how do you kind of feel about that?
Well, after what you just said, how could I not? How could I not try to opine? I think John said it really well in this kind of this experience of like the Holy Spirit descends upon John or descends upon Jesus, right? And then they have this mystical moment of awakening. And I think that's an absolutely excellent way to put it. I would have said, had you asked me first, that I kind of look at that as the culmination of the marriage between the opposites, if you will, right? Between positive, negative, yin and yang, male, female, if you will, is the action, it is the actualization of that marriage, or the chemical wedding, even maybe in the Rosicrucian kind of mindset. That being said, I think it could be looked at as like chi in the Eastern view of the world, right? Or in quantum physics as the quantum field. I feel like, because the Holy Spirit is this this concept that can act everywhere and in anywhere and is in all things, right? And that is chi, that's energy. That's how anything that manifests. It manifests as energy. So if as the most like tangible way to look at that, I would say that that's probably my best answer.
Wow.
But I feel like John is really onto something with this idea of having that Gnostic moment too, of that awakening experience.
Definitely. I love that. I love that perspective. I kind of wanted to touch on sort of Knights Templar aspects of things. So, I found myself becoming lately just increasingly interested in the history of the Knights Templar, as it appears to me pretty clear from what I can kind of glean, as it is definitely a true primordial lineage, which has inevitably kind of led me to the Templar Collegia, of which, John, you're co-founder of, and I've just find myself pretty much like 100% in alignment with the way of the Templar, the Templar as it is, and its sort of mission and its moral code and the goals as far as I've come to understand them. And so I wanted to ask, sort of like, I think that I think I'd read like the Sovereign Order of the Initiatic Temple still active in France, I believe. And there was a former U.S. body that was dissolved. The former U.S. body, I was wondering if that had led to the founding of the current Templar Collegia. Yeah, that's just a question that I had, and I was wondering if you could kind of touch on maybe some of the background of the Templar lineage, and I would just invite you to feel free to go as far back in history as you wish, through maybe Jacques de Molay, or even to the foundations, as far as it goes back to, I think I had read Hugo's de Pains or something along those lines. I'm not sure. But yeah, maybe just go give a little insight into the whole history of the Knights Templar and how it all came to be and how it comes to its sort of modern day form. Big question.
All right, man. It's gonna be, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to do all this in the time we have, but
No worries.
and I think that, as far as a real detailed historical narrative, I think Timothy Hogan would be a wonderful guest for you to have, man. He's got a mind that's amazing. His memory for things is incredible. But yeah, essentially it's an ancient order. It's the foundation of pretty much all the Western esoteric tradition, and that includes Rosicrucian, Freemasons, Golden Dawn, all that stuff all stems from the Knights Templar and the ancient wisdom that they perpetuated, that they had rediscovered and protected through the ages, and have enabled it to be transmitted to us. And I feel like, it doesn't really get any better than that. It's pretty cool. And a lot of people associate like the Templars with like the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant and all that stuff, and treasure and secret maps and Oak Island and all this cool stuff, which is true. Like, they are associated with all those things. But to me, there's something more important. Like, it's great that there may be valuable treasures or historical things or relics or hidden things that would undermine the entire religious world religions. So it's not stuff to be taken lightly or just revealed. But to me, the most important thing is the wisdom, right? It's like that's the true treasure is the wisdom that's been passed down, and the truths and the sacred truths that have been perpetuated. That's the true grail, so I try to focus on that more than the other stuff. All the other stuff is pretty cool, Um,
Definitely pretty cool.
but yeah, I mean, it's essentially like the Templar Collegia, which is sort of a study body. It's sort of an outer court, um, almost like a probationary study period, right? So it's kind of the outer shell of a lineage of the Templar, which is the Order of the Temple of Secret Initiates, which is one of many different Templar lineages that they're surviving today. And it traditionally, goes back quite a ways. But in more recent times, the former Grand Master before Timothy Hogan was Raymond Bernard, who was also the Grand Master of the Rosicrucians in France. And initially this Templar lineage was sort of, how do I explain this? So there's different vehicles for this lineage, right? Over the years, over time.
Mm-hmm.
There's different vehicles for this thing. And one of those vehicles was the Rosicrucian order for a while. But what happens is you'll see this throughout history. If you study these different orders, they do really great, and then they tend to kind of like drop off. They either disappear or they break apart or something happens, and then new orders spring up. So there was a point in time where Raymond Bernard decided that particular vehicle wasn't healthy or whatever it was. So he decided to create a separate vehicle for that Templar lineage. And Timothy Hogan got involved with that, and through his own efforts and through just the fact that he's an amazing person and a great leader, and was given the title of Grand Master of that lineage after Raymond Bernard passed away. It was passed to Tim. And that vehicle, same thing, just became unhealthy. It became more concerned about power structures and titles and paying dues, and kind of forgot about what this is about. Like when I say about the Grail's cool, but the wisdom's cooler,
Yes.
kind of forgot about that, right? And so Tim stepped away from that, and I did as well, for many reasons. And we just kind of decided, you know what, we need to create something better, something, just a healthier egregore, right, for these things, and bring it back to what it's really about, for this new cycle we're moving into. And that's kind of why we formed the Templar Collegia, to help people that want to be involved in these things, that are seeking deeper truths, or wanting to grow as individuals or whatever it is, help them along that path. So there's a study a course and things like that. There's books and things like that. And mostly, I mean, it to me, it's just the collective of people. Like the people that are involved are just amazing people. So you get to talk with so many people, man, and learn so much stuff. And it's our mission statement is right here. It's kind of cool. It's like a little thing, but it says
Oh, yeah.
the Templar Collegia is a collective of initiates and mystics. Our vow is to protect, study, and perpetuate the esoteric tradition in all its forms, under the direction of the Order of the Temple of Secret Initiates and guidance from the Grand Master of the Knights Templar. So that's kind of a good summary of what it is. So,
Absolutely.
but yeah, man, I could go back and talk about all the things, throughout time, but I mean, essentially, our job as Templars, it's like there's that people always talk about, like when they speak of Knights Templar, they think of like, oh well, they were a military force that protected pilgrims on the way to the Holy Land, so that, Christian or Catholic pilgrims could pray at the Holy Land safely during the Crusades and stuff. And to me, I feel like that's kind of metaphorical. If you think of like the Holy Land being inside of you, like the Holy Land being your heart, right? Our job is to protect pilgrims on the path to the Holy Land, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our job is to help people, protect them and guide them and help them find the God of their heart in whatever way that is, whatever path they choose. Our job is to help them along that path to find whatever God it is they need to find, whatever symbol that helps them understand themselves and become better and grow and evolve and come back next life and learn even more.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, I mean, that goes hand in hand. I think the way of the heart, and the way of the Templar, I think that's kind of just hand in hand. That's beautifully said, and I agree 100% with you on all that. And for me, it's like, what better organization and what better mission to get behind than that? I don't know, but I love it. So Aaron, I wanted to kind of ask you, this is kind of diverting a little bit, but I don't know a whole lot about Kung Fu. But from my understanding,
Mm-hmm.
there's like a number of different Kung Fu sort of like aspects. I guess there's like Shaolin Kung Fu, Wing Chun, Tai Chi. What's the kind of practice for you yourself that you've been practicing? Is there anything in particular about Kung Fu that you find super significant or noteworthy that you find interesting that you might want to touch on for the listeners?
Do we have another 2 hours? Just kidding. Yeah, so yes, there are a bunch of different types of Kung Fu. So Kung Fu, like I said earlier, means hard work over time, or energy spent over time to produce skill. So Kung Fu can actually be a whole bunch of different things. Music is Kung Fu, and it's part of Kung Fu training is learning music and learning a stringed instrument. It can be sculpting, it could be painting, it could be poetry, it could be calligraphy, it could be dance, it could be basketball, it could be your Kung Fu, right? Or whatever. But as far as the martial aspect of that, there are two major types of Chinese martial arts. One is external styles of Kung Fu, and one is internal styles of Kung Fu. Namely, the Shaolin arts are typically the external arts, and you see things like the five animal form, the Hungar Kung Fu, or you see the 7-star praying mantis form, or Northern Shaolin Kung Fu, which is the big, long acrobatic kicking styles, right? And then you have the Wu Dang or Wu Tang styles, which are like Tai Chi or Bakwa or Jingyi or Lehi Bafa, which are primarily internal systems. So they work from the inside out, and they work from softness to hardness. Whereas the Shaolin and the external styles start with the outside and work inside, and they start with hard and they go to the soft. The system that I practice is an internal and external system called Chuka Tonglong, and it is translated to Southern Praying Mantis. I just did actually at our last Templar gathering thing, I did a lecture on a little bit of this history with this system, because it comes from the Ming Dynasty. Ming actually translates to light, right? And they were all entrenched in the seemingly the esoteric undercurrents of their culture at the time. The entire system is symbolic based. It's based on the 6-pointed star, the footwork, the power generation, the theory, the fighting technique can all be summed up in that first tattoo I showed you with the 6-pointed star and all the different angulation on it. And a lot of martial arts you can find that as time went on, because eventually martial arts went from China and they branched out. It came from India, it came from yoga, and that merged with the boxing systems that China had and made it this more spiritually based system. So at the core of all of the Chinese arts is this focus on spirituality, spiritualism, mysticism, enlightenment, obtaining enlightenment, illumination, right? If you go and read any of the ancient texts like the Art of War, right, the pinnacle of winning is without fighting. That's the highest win is to win without fighting. So they say that, right, it's better to be a gardener, or better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So you train, again, it's for that sovereignty, right? So nobody can bully me around. But the idea is that I gain such high skill that I never have to use it, and I never want to use it because I'm not trying to have any conflict with anything around me, right? The point of the Tao is to live in harmony. And the same with Buddhism, right? While these two, it should be noted too that the external and Shaolin systems typically come from Buddhism, and the internal Wudang systems tend to come from Taoism. But in there is also Confucianism, right? So the whole East Asian pantheon of culture is really fascinating, and how they all influenced each other over time. But this particular system I do comes from about the 1600s and the end of the Ming Dynasty. And when the Manchus took over, the Ming fled to the Shaolin Temple in the north, and they burned it down. And they fled to the Shaolin Temple in the south, and they burned it down. And then they integrated into that area and became known as the Hakka people, which means northern guest. So as the Manchus were hunting these people down, this royal family, this was their royal family kung fu system. It was a black art. It was a secret art that nobody was taught. Nobody even knew they trained it. It was super fascinating to me. And all the qigong that comes with it, right? There's exercises that are intended for physical combat and martial purposes. There are, it's called scholastic qigong, which is like more of an enlightenment seeking, right? This is trying to illuminate the qi to get to the third eye, which when you start comparing this stuff to other esoteric traditions around the world, they're all, it's all the same. It's all the same thing. They're all talking about the same thing. The neidan, or the internal qigongs that the Taoists did to try to achieve immortality. I can draw correlations through the Kabbalah, and the kind of spiritual exercises that people who study the Kabbalah would do, and the way that the body is broken down into different sections, like the dantians of lower, mid, and upper, correlate to the mess stuff.
I see like a cool
I'm back.
square and compass.
There he is. Recording in
I think you fell asleep, bro.
I bored him to a nap.
No, I'm so
I'm gonna have
glad
to kill you now.
I'm so glad I asked, because wow, what a amazing insight into Kung Fu that I had no idea about. That was great. I popped out about a minute ago or so I didn't mean for that to happen. So if there was anything you wanted to add on to that or end with that, feel free.
Yeah, no,
we had this like moment of like, we just explained everything while you were gone. It was like,
yep,
great.
It dropped all the secrets,
all the Masonic secrets, all the Templar
theory of everything.
Like, I'm not going to say it again.
Missed it. You only get once.
Damn, dude.
Yeah, it's so in my daily life, I study a handful of things with vigorous passion. Music is one of them. Kung Fu is one of them, and esotericism, spirituality, mysticism, God, whatever you want to term it. And then like history, I really enjoy, but all of these things are like tied together. They're all related, right? In Kung Fu, there's if you ever watch Kung Fu movies, you'll hear the words Jingwu Association. And it was this attempt to kind of bring to all these different systems together, because everywhere, like Kung Fu is localized in its foundation, right? It comes from the town where the people lived. Like Chen style Tai Chi comes from Chen village, right? These systems in the Juklum part of, like, so Southern Praying Mantis has 5 branches. Juklum is the temple version of this system. The Chuka is the royal family version, and it came from the palace. So some of the system is based on, we have footwork called Sangokma, which means dog stepping or triangle stepping. And the stepping is mimicked after dog fighting. And if you watch the way that dogs circle each other, that's how we fight. So these systems were based on, some of the hands are actually based off the domestic cat. So you're basing these animal systems where like you have these guys with the stories of, he went into the woods and he saw the tiger attack the crane, and then they formed the system of kung fu, right? Or the same with this Southern Praying Mantis stuff, right? It's based off of a bug. Some of the stories come from that. But there's other parts of it that aren't so well known. And the only people in that time in China who had domesticated animals were the royal family, right? Nobody had domesticated dogs and cats that just roamed around. They didn't have the money for it to maintain that kind of stuff, unless it was being useful on the farm or something. So they were using literally what was at hand to develop these systems, and they would study the dogs. And I watch my dogs play and fight all the time, and I actually have trained my pit bulls in the past to be my sparring partners. I used to have a dog named Stella. I could go, Stella, kung fu, and she would jump up and she would start attacking me. And I would practice my footwork with her, because who better to practice dog stepping with than a dog who fucking does that naturally? Sure. You know what I mean? She's the best teacher. Yeah, this stuff fascinates me, man. And so the Jingwu thing, like you have to study calligraphy, you have to study mathematics, you have to study music, you have to study philosophy, you have to study poetry, right? The idea is to be this well-rounded person, right? Also, an interesting side note is that this Southern Praying Mantis system is intimately tied somehow with Chinese Freemasonry and the Chinese Benevolent Association and Chinese esotericism and secret societies like the Tong, which means triangle.
Wow. I had no idea anything about Chinese Freemasonry or anything, so that's all very interesting to me.
The first time I got exposed to even the concept, right? So I was in my 20s. I just moved to LA, and I had just recently got into all this stuff right in the last few years. And I had read stuff by Robert Anson Wilson, was my favorite author at the time, and Illuminatus Trilogy and Cosmic Trigger and Prometheus Rising. And the co-author of that book, the Illuminatus Trilogy, was a guy named Robert Shea, or Shea. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but S-H-E-A. And he wrote this series called Shike, S-H-I-K-E, and still to this day, one of my favorite book series. And it's about this warrior, this like warrior of a ninja clan, who goes on these adventures, and he's got this long love story and stuff, but secret societies are involved. And then eventually the Chinese Freemasons come into it, and eventually the Illuminati show up in his story in this Eastern Asian setting, which at the time, right, this is 20 something years ago, from 20 years ago now, hadn't occurred to me how this might be tied in across from east to west. And most certainly it has to be, and it is. So it's just cool for me to find these little breadcrumbs, right, and follow them around. Most of this stuff fell into my lap, right? My Sifu, who I love very dearly and has been one of the biggest influences on my life. Like, I didn't go seek him out. He showed up in my life one day, and I didn't necessarily intend to become as close with, like, I wasn't trying to become a competitive fighter or something. I was at one point going to be the lineage holder of the system, but then music got in the way, and I pursued that instead. But this stuff literally just found me through synchronicity, right? While I was studying this esoteric stuff and learning about that, then the Kung Fu happens, and I realized there's these ties to it. And I didn't start putting the symbolic parallels together until a few years ago, right? When I knew there was the relation, but then finding the Templar Collegia and meeting Tim and John and kind of getting exposed to all this new information and symbolism, I started making connections that I hadn't seen yet in my life, right? So the learning and the growing never stops, which is just awesome. The wisdom is the gift, as John said.
Absolutely. Okay, well, sort of on that note, I want to ask you or John, either one of you, have you heard of the Order of the Black Dragon or the Order of the Green Dragon, anything like this in relation to kind of like the Chinese lineages, or does that strike any familiarity with you?
Well, I can say with certainty that one of the Hakka systems is also called Black Dragon. That's a sister style to what the Southern Praying Mantis that I do, and also is called Bakme or Pai Mei or Bakme. Pai Mei from Kill Bill Volume 2. If you ever watched that movie, the Kung Fu master in that is named Pai Mei, and it means white eyebrow. But all of those systems are intimately related to each other. The Green Dragon, there's definitely a couple of secret societies who've gone by that name, and I don't know much about them because they're secret societies in China, and I am not a member, nor am I Chinese.
It's like a Tibetan Japanese thing, if I recall correctly, but Yeah, I just thought I would ask because that's interesting.
It's certainly
Okay.
possible that it's in both too, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to ask each of you, maybe if you would name one or two particular teachers or books or authors that you feel have been more influential or impactful on progressing your overall awareness or development, or whom you may credit with sort of expanding your insights into esoterica or spirituality or just life in general. Maybe just one or two teachers or books or authors or anything like that. I guess I'll go ahead and I'll start with you, Aaron, and then I'll ask John.
Well, for sure, we'll give Tim Hogan a plug here, right? And he's not only one of like my favorite people and one of my close friends, but like he's one of my favorite authors. I love reading Tim's work because it's so, he writes it almost in a conversational kind of way where he's dealing with these really intellectual subjects, but he talks to you in a dialogue sort of sense. So it's really easy to, I burned through his books and I have to go find myself rereading them again because it was so easy to read that I know I missed stuff. I know there's information that I just breezed over because it was so fun to read. And he's got a plethora of books. I'll tell you, John and Tim both have been huge influences on my life in the last 6-7 years, in guiding me in the different ways to trust myself in learning this learning this stuff, which is ultimately learning me, learning about who I am and my connection to my experience, and trusting myself into venturing out and thinking in new ways. As far as we've named a bunch in this: Eliphas Levi, Manly P. Hall. We're really big over these last couple of years, especially that pandemic time, man. Whew, man, I was a reading machine.
For sure.
I read a lot of Manly Hall when I was stuck on lockdown, I'll tell you what.
Beautiful. Well, how about you, John? What would you say as far as you're concerned?
Pretty similar to what Aaron said. Like, as far as having a mentor or an example, as far as the esoteric tradition goes, and what the Templar tradition is and things like that. I'd say Timothy Hogan has been a huge teacher for me. He's been amazing. Great friend, and I've learned a lot from him. And just all of his, like Aaron said, his books are incredible. They're very simple, they're very easy to read. So he's been a huge influence on me. Once Manly Palmer Hall as well. And phenomenal influence on me. Sir Francis Bacon is also someone that been a muse for me for quite a while. From beyond the grave, and actually George Washington, like he's also been a huge influence on me just as a person, and as a person.
Can you maybe go into
like,
a little bit of detail on why that is?
There's a lot there, like, but I would say that for me personally, like reading about him, reading about his life story, just the kind of person he was. There's a lot, everybody knows he's the first president, but a lot of people don't know that he was not a noble. He wasn't born that way. He had to learn how to be that. He would actually constantly try to read about how to behave in certain social situations. The guy was constantly bettering himself, trying to achieve something and manifesting something. So he was trying to create something in his mind's eye of what he wanted to be and actually pursue it, which to me is very powerful. And then just the fact that, like, the guy was, he's so brave. Like, there's legends and stories of this guy where cannonballs are like landing next to him, like while he's on his horse. He doesn't even flinch. He just keeps talking to his men. Like that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, man.
Or he had like bullet holes like in his
The
hat.
hat, yeah. Unfazed somehow.
Yeah, like just things like that, and the fact that like he was offered to be king, and he said nah, like nah.
No thanks.
So like this country gave him the opportunity to be king, like of America, you know, and he no, you know, he just wanted he was a true believer in you know the ideals that they were trying to do, and I just find him as an amazing person, an amazing leader, and also somebody who made mistakes, you know, like he wasn't always this amazing war general. Like he fucked up quite a bit, like, you know, but he also learned from that, and he would like try to figure out why and how he could do better. And I just think that people, you know, his men saw him as like a peer, you know what I mean? He seemed like he was pretty cool dude. Also a genius, man, freaking genius. Like there's a story about how there wasn't enough like ammunition or cannonballs or gunpowder or whatever, and the British were like approaching by ship, and Washington's men were on this cliff face, like up high, and you know, they were like, we're fucking doomed, we don't have enough, I mean, we can't fight, like they're here, they come, they're on ships, they're gonna kill us. And Washington was like, all right, told his men, he's like, go to all the local towns you can and gather up all of the cannons you can possibly find, right? And the men were like, well, why? We can't fire him anyway, like what's the point? He's like, just do it, right? So they went and gathered all these cannons up, and he had them line them up all along the cliffside. And the British were like, fuck that.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter that they weren't loaded. They didn't know they weren't loaded, or they couldn't.
Exactly.
They were like, we're not going that way. So
Exactly.
shit like that. Like, you know, I mean, that's pretty cool. So sorry, I'm passionate about.
No,
that's awesome. I didn't know some of that stuff, and I've never seen you get excited about George Washington like that before. So that was really cool.
Yeah,
Pretty
man.
cool dude, man.
That's what it's all about. You know, making progress and just whatever any individual can do to better themselves, and as long as they have that aim in mind, I'm all about that and supporting that. So I think that's beautiful. Last question, I guess I would like to ask each one of you if there's just any last words or messages that you want to put out there that you guys feel maybe interesting or necessary or inspirational for anyone listening. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and I'll ask you, Aaron, and then I'll ask you, John.
Oh, just remember that we're all in this shit together. I say that at the end of every Gemini Syndrome show, and I say it at the end of almost every podcast I do not too. We're all in this together, man. Same team, even when it doesn't appear that way. I assure you that at the end game, I think we're all going to the same place.
Yeah.
So teamwork makes the dream work. Actually, on that note, I was watching something earlier this week, and I forget what it was, but this was said: the time of competition is over, and the time of cooperation has arrived.
Yes.
And I've been meditating on that all week, and it's so fucking relevant, man. So just looking at human history and looking at the evolution of us as a being and a species, right? We live in a world of abundance. We don't need to compete with each other anymore, right? I don't need to worry about survival, and as a whole, we don't need to do that anymore. Cooperate. We've gotten to the point where competitiveness helped push innovation to a place where we now can pretty much live without most of the suffering of normal three-dimensional reality, right? It's climate controlled everywhere we go. We eat whenever we want. We don't have to hunt or grow our own food, right? And we have enough. So now it's the point, the only way that we grow from here at this point is we switch to cooperation and helping everybody excel from this point forward. Otherwise the whole system crashes.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. 100%. Well, and how about yourself, John? Any last words or messages for anybody?
Don't forget to check out the Immerser single featuring Aaron
My
Nordstrom,
man, my man.
Gemini Syndrome, called Self, available everywhere right now.
I'm so glad I was leaving that for you because that was going to be my first thing was a plug. Any words of wisdom? Yep, check out Immerser and Gemini Syndrome online.
Pulling your leg. I would say never be afraid to shine. You know, be the best person you can possibly be, and you know, never let anybody dim your light.
Dim your fucking light, man. Oh, I love that saying. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
You know, that's pretty important. And then also freedom is a responsibility.
Any elaboration to that one?
I love you too. All right. No.
All right. Well, do you guys want to throw out any plugs, anywhere people can find you guys and your work, your music, your anything about you guys? Go ahead and feel free to plug away on that.
Immerser Music. Immerser Music is available on all streaming platforms. Gemini Syndrome is available on all streaming platforms. Wyote, like Coyote with a W, is my Belgium band with a bunch of Viking dudes from Belgium. Is available on all streaming services. Stay tuned for more Immerser Aaron Nordstrom collaborations.
Can't wait.
Keep your eyes out for some more stuff coming for me on the side later this year. I got things in the kitchen cooking.
Alrighty. Beautiful.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, yeah, what he said.
Immerser Music is it .com? Do you got an immersermusic.com?
I don't know, man. Just look up Immerser on
yeah, if
Google
you see
whatever, you'll find it.
infinity symbol with the Templar cross thing.
Yeah, Instagram and all that other stuff. But also Templar Collegia.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, if you're interested and it's something you're thinking you might want to be a part of, send an email to templarcollegia@gmail.com. Yeah.
Boom. There it is.
Yep.
You guys are both badasses. I love you guys. Thank you so much again for doing this. Greatly appreciated. And till next time.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. It was great to be here. Great to hang out with you guys. And
Yeah, thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk, man. This is really
absolutely.
awesome. You're a great host.
Yeah, very, very cool conversation. And please, let me know when we've got this thing going live, and I'll fucking post it all over the
And
place.
we're charged to change our vision. You know, free